you will hear the Syrian official governmental position with this regard. Of course, the Syrian government is the main concerned party by all these deliberations and discussions, whether they take place in Geneva or in New York, or in Damascus, of course. Number two, the Secretary General has, as well as Mr. de Mistura actually in his briefing before the Council, both of them, and then they reiterated the same position here before you a few minutes ago, they both of them focused and emphasized on the negative role of the neighboring countries of Syria in facilitating, supporting, arming, training, sponsoring the so-called foreign terrorist fighters, the mercenaries, collected from all over the world and sent to Syria through our common border with Turkey and Jordan, mainly speaking. So the issue of combating terrorism is the priority of the priorities for the Syrian government. And here we are reading the map with the Secretary General as well as with Mr. de Mistura the same way almost. I'm saying almost because combating terrorism is a priority or the priority of the priorities for the Syrian government. If we neglect to deal and to cope with the phenomenon of the foreign terrorist fighters or combating terrorism, then the other tracks might not be operational, as you know, because we cannot go ahead with the political track and leave and put aside the issue of combating terrorism. We need stabilization of the country, putting an end to the violence, to the terrorism perpetrated by the armed groups, and then we engage peacefully in the other tracks, on the other tracks. So number two is very important for us, and I reiterate and emphasize on the need to combat terrorism and exert pressure on the neighboring countries of Syria who are facilitating the crossing border operations by the terrorists through our common border with Turkey and Jordan, mainly speaking, but also putting a serious pressure on the Israelis to stop their support and backing of Jabhat al-Nusra in the demilitarized zone on the Golan. So we have a couple of challenges that we need to address before we react, as here I am talking about the Syrian government, to the proposals submitted today by Mr. de Mistura. I am in your hands. Please.
And I'm sure you'll get more questions on this. First, I wanted to know, what's the government's response to airstrikes in Syria by Turkey and the way that seems to be going with this idea of a safe zone? Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for raising this question. It's an important one. Actually, in my side talks with Mr. de Mistura, I raised this concern before engaging in the closed session deliberations. I talked to him and I raised this concern. And he agrees with me. He agreed with me, and that the Turkish escalation, military escalation, runs against the efforts, political efforts of Mr. de Mistura, as well as against the necessary environment that should be prevailed in order to engage in this political dialogue that Mr. de Mistura spoke about it. So I know for sure that both the Secretary General and Mr. de Mistura raised this concern in the closed deliberations also, and they emphasized on the necessity for those who have a leverage of pressure on the Turkish government to act expeditiously so that the Turkish government would refrain from continuing this military escalation both on the Iraqi border as well as on the Syrian border. So this is an important issue because Mr. de Mistura and the Secretary General, although they approached somehow and elaborated a little bit on the external elements and factors of the destabilization, the terrorist destabilization of Syria, they also need, with other members of the Security Council, to shed a crystal cut on the external elements or external factors that should need to be addressed, such as the Turkish government's assistance and backing of the foreign terrorist fighters collected from over the world and sent to Syria to commit bloodsheds against the Syrian people and to destroy the infrastructure and commit mass crimes and crimes against humanity. Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador. About this new proposal by Mr. Mistura, do you have any sense what could be the composition of this working group? And do you have any sense if UN, how much UN will be involved in the mediation?
We don't know yet all the details. This is why I said in the introductory remarks, I have just made that we are looking for further details from Mr. de Mistura as well as from the Secretary General. The discussions with Mr. de Mistura will continue and go on here and in Damascus through the diplomatic channels, of course. We are backing and welcoming and supporting all genuine efforts and endeavors to put an end to the bloodsheds committed on the Syrian territory against the Syrian people and against the Syrian government by terrorist and armed groups. Most of them were condemned according to the Security Council resolutions 2170, 2178, and 2199. So we have a huge legitimate and legal arsenal backing our standpoint with regard to the necessity and the priority of combating terrorism. We will continue we will wait for further details from Mr. de Mistura with regard to his proposals. We don't know yet, we don't have yet the comprehensive picture of this framework suggested by the Special Envoy. لم يقل أحد أن الحل العسكري هو الأساس. لم يقل أحد. موقف الحكومة السورية منذ البداية كان أنه لا يوجد بالأساس شيء اسمه حل عسكري. هناك تعامل عسكري مع ظاهرة إرهابية تنتشر في البلاد. have a constitution right now, which was voted democratically by the Syrian people. It is valid until next year. The parliamentarian elections also would take place next year. In light of the current constitution, so we cannot just talk about the constitution and the necessity to move to another constitution without having a constitution that would cover the period in between.
This Yarmouk issue, do you know that there's some controversy about the UN saying that the Yarmouk camp for Palestinian refugees in Damascus is not besieged? And so some people have said it's still besieged, they can't get in. What's the status of the camp, and where does it stand?
Yesterday, the Undersecretary General, Mr. O'Brien, said blatantly, publicly, in the Council, in his briefing, and in the close deliberations also, that the Al Yarmouk camp in Damascus, in the suburbs of Damascus, is not besieged. He said that. And this is what we kept saying for years. And some members of the Security Council used to cast doubts about what we were saying. Until yesterday, when the Undersecretary General himself said that the camp is not besieged. Students leave the camp for their exams outside, and then they get back. Sick people leave the camp to be treated in the Syrian hospitals, and then they get back. Of course, we do have terrorists inside, ISIS, mainly speaking, and Al-Nusra Front, and some fanatic and radical Palestinian wings considered by the Syrian government as terrorist factions, who are all operational inside the camp. And those are the ones who are preventing the civilians, the remaining of the civilians, because practically speaking, there are no more civilians inside the camp. A few number only is inside. But of course, the main important is that the camp is not besieged. And that was something that we kept saying for years. And unfortunately, Mrs. Amos, if you remember, used in each of her briefings before the Council to contradict this fact and to say that the camp is besieged by the Syrian government. Thank you so much.